You know that thing that we do, popping on a minute early to make sure that everything is in its place as it should be. So don't be surprised if the first minute is full of gibberish, because that is just how we do. I hope anybody that's on listening at this point is doing well. All right, here we go. Perfect. Oh, and that's got volume. So we're just going to let it run for a minute, see who pops on. In the meantime as well, I do want to mention thank you guys so much for your patience as this presentation was delayed or postponed by a week. There was just a lot going on and it was a last minute adjustment. So I appreciate any patience that everybody had for that. It was greatly appreciated as stuff was going on. I hope everybody's doing well and seeing some fun birds at their feeders. I think the most interesting one that a customer has mentioned is they had a northern parula, which was actually, it's a warbler species, that was actually checking out one of their hummingbirds and keeping their hummingbirds away from the feeder. So really cool bird. Shame that it happened at that point. But yeah, I hope you're seeing some fun birds this summer as well too. This is the second day of summer officially, which is very fun. So with that, I have got that we are now at 8:30, so we're just going to go ahead and get started. If anybody pops on, and if you guys have any questions, definitely feel free to leave them in the comments as well too. So, oh, I see somebody's there. Hey guys. So with that, we're going to go ahead and just jump right into it as well. So first off, with house finches, these little lovable birds are usually found quite frequently at the feeders, so you'll be hard-pressed not to recognize these guys, even if you didn't know them by their actual name. These birds are house finches, which of course means they are in one of the finch families, specifically the family Fringillidae, which of course includes a lot of different finches, some of our grosbeaks, redpolls, and crossbills as well too. House finches are really cool because the habitat that they have arranged for is quite impressive. Anywhere from urban centers and cities to neighborhoods, open coniferous forests to even dry deserts. They have quite a range that they'll definitely take advantage of. And their range map really shows it pretty well too. So you can see they have a great western population that goes down to central Mexico and up to the my goodness, northwest portion of the US and a little bit into Canada. And then there's kind of a split in the middle where they do have a small population right in the center. But other than that, they actually have a larger eastern population as well too. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. Because the map is all purple, that shows that they are year-round residents, which primarily means that you can find these birds in these locations throughout the year. They might shuffle a little bit from place to place, not super far, but overall you can find them pretty easily. Yeah, good morning. Thank you guys for tuning in. I really appreciate it. So something that I find really cool about these birds is they actually started as a western population. So if we look back over here, this part way back in the day, the western section was primarily where the house finches range was. And what happened was back in 1939, before any types of laws were in place to protect a lot of bird species or anything, there was a small population that was captured from the west, brought to the east in New York, and was tried to and people tried to sell it as a pet species that people could purchase. They found that the sales weren't super great, so instead of putting the birds back where they came from, they were just like, you'll be fine. And they actually released a small population in New York. From there, they actually spread quite well over the eastern part of North America as well too, and a lot of the U.S. So that is very impressive how quickly and how large their range really expanded from that point. Now, house finches are actually known to have one of the widest ecological ranges of any current living bird species. So like I mentioned, their habitat range is impressive. From deserts to urban cities to open woodlands, they definitely have a variety that they can kind of fit into. And a very cool thing is that they don't compete with any of our native species in the area. So unlike other species like starlings, like European starlings, that can potentially outcompete some of our native residents, the house finches, even though they were native to this western part of the U.S., they're still an introduced species to the east. They haven't outcompeted any of our native species, so they're more of a naturalized species, actually very similar to honeybees, who are not a native species in North America, but have done well to kind of mix and mingle with a lot of our native populations. Now, because these birds have such a large range, it's not surprising that they have multiple subspecies as well. Because these ranges or these populations can sometimes be set apart and separated from other populations due to mountain ranges or rivers or anything like that, whether it's just kind of completely separated like in the Midwest, it has shown that there have been different subspecies, which essentially this means that even though these birds are all house finches, they have different body sizes, bill sizes, bill shapes, different wing and tail length, and also their plumage coloration can vary. Whether that's actual coloration, like the changes in color, or if it's just the depth of their coloration. So some subspecies have red that reaches farther down, while others have maybe a darker coloration. Maybe it goes further down the back. Maybe there's less of it as well too. So there's a lot of subtle variations that researchers have been able to take note of as they've been researching the house finches as well too, which has been really interesting. And of course, thank you for the praise, Monica. I appreciate it. I don't know if I'm the best in the biz, but I really appreciate the confidence. So something that is really cool, just in general as well. Now remember, because this population originally started in the West, that's where a lot of their original natural expansion is. So in the West, there's a lot more natural genetic diversity than that in the East, because a small population was brought over to the East and it didn't really have the chance to mix and mingle with others. So there's greater genetic diversity and more variation in the Western section of North America than the Eastern section. Now, when it comes to actual ID, because we got to talk about that at some point, overall, regardless of where you find them, house finches are generally small birds in comparison with a lot of your other finches, maybe like a little bit smaller, around the same as bluebirds, essentially, if you need like a better size variation. They have a thick conical bill, so it's definitely made for some heavier food items there, and they also have a notched tail as well, too. Overall, whether you're looking at the female or the male, they do have a lot of brown involved in their feather coloration. Females especially have a lighter brown on the head, a darker brown on the wings, and a kind of streaking pattern on the belly as well too. Now, house finches are sexually dimorphic, which means your male and your female are visibly different from each other. The males are the ones that have bright coloration. Remember, males usually, in songbird species anyways, males have bright coloration in order to attract the female's attention, while females usually look a lot more subtle, so they're less noticeable, especially during nesting season and everything as well too. So for the males, they've got that bright coloration. Their head is usually very bright, as well as their neck, and often on their rump they have a nice bright kind of red. They do have some red streaking on the belly, but you'll see that it turns to brown as it goes further down as well too. So that's your main difference between your males and your females, but you could still tell that the body shape is very similar. Now, when it comes to their song and their call, both can actually help you identify a house finch in general. I will admit I have a better time listening to their call than I do their song, but both are good to know. So first off, the song is basically kind of a jumbled warbling of short notes. Let's see if I remember which one I picked. And let's make sure this isn't going to blast you with a lot of volume. Hold on. It would have if I didn't pay attention. Here we go. Here we go. Hold on. Here we go. Sorry if it might still be a little loud. I'm pretty sure that's a decent. And you know what? Actually, that's the wrong song. I mean, it is the same song, but you get the idea. Hold on. All right. So usually it kind of has upward and downward notes, but it ends kind of on that downward slur, which is a lot of fun. Hopefully you guys are hearing that okay. So you've got the song. Usually males are the ones that sing the most. Females might have a shorter song that they sing as well. And then for your calls, it's actually just kind of a buzzy kind of trill, essentially. It just kind of slides up in pitch. I find that that call is very distinguishable for a house finch, because oftentimes most calls are very subtle and make it harder to identify. Okay, cool. Thank you for letting me know. I appreciate that. So definitely kind of keeping track of that can make it easier to find out if you have some house finches in the area as well too. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that there are some similar species to house finches that people can confuse very easily. One of which for our location is the purple finch. We get house finches throughout the entire year, but purple finches we get in the winter time. So we can potentially have both during the same time of year. So make sure when you're trying to identify the difference between your house finch and your purple finch, you look for two different things. First off, purple finches have this very nice fine white eyebrow, while our house finches have no such eyebrow. Secondly, the red coloration, or the purple coloration, whatever you want to call it, that is on the purple finch, good morning, thank you guys, actually extends much farther down the belly than it does on the house finch. At least for the males anyways, for sure. So even if they both have red kind of streaking on the belly, the purple finch is going to have red streaking that goes down much farther than the house finch. And again, for the female purple finches, you just want to see that they have that nice white eyebrow there in comparison. Cassin's finch is found out west, so we're not really going to have that problem here, but for those out west, it's going to be a very similar difference. You have a subtle eyebrow, and Cassin's finch also does have a very nice bright red crest that does kind of distinguish it from the house finches as well too. Plus they have more of a speckled pattern than like a streaking, but very similar to kind of the purple finch differences as well. Now, something that is really cool is that house finches do have that nice bright red coloration, but they actually have a few different colors as well. Now, the way that they get these feathers, these colors, isn't actually produced in the body, and it's caused by something called a carotenoid pigment. These pigments produce red, yellow, and orange colorations. So in order to get those colors, these birds actually have to eat certain fruits and insects in order to have those deposited in the feathers as they molt. So depending on how bright your house finch is, it shows how much, oh my goodness, the wording is hard, how much good access they had to good resources, essentially. And for some house finches, they may not get that bright red. They might actually get more of a yellow or an orange coloration as well, too. So this can be a mix of location or just what their body is best at kind of making for those colors as well. But even if you have a different color house finch, you're still going to have very similar the color pattern is going to be very similar. Goodness. So you're going to have it on the belly, the head, and on the rump as well too. So it's still going to be the same locations. It might just be a slightly different color as well. So, of course, they do get these colors from their diet. Most of their diet consists of plant material as well, so seeds, buds, flowers, and they'll definitely take advantage of fruits in the yard as well, too. They will take a little bit of advantage of fly larvae that they'll eat during nesting season and also give their young for a little bit of boost in protein. These birds have multiple foraging strategies, whether it's perching on the top of a small plant and kind of pulling the seeds out from that, whether it's clinging to the side and as they're kind of swaying in the breeze, grabbing multiple different seeds or fruits, or if it's just foraging on the ground and kind of getting any seeds that have fallen from the ground. These guys are very versatile in their ability to kind of move around and get different types of food options as well too. And it's very fun to watch them definitely get their food. And of course, the one thing that makes them so much fun as well is these birds always forage in pairs or in flocks. So it definitely gets really busy and active with house finch activity at the feeders or just in your yard in general, which is always a fun sight to see. So in regards to different types of behaviors, and especially in courtship before nesting season, these birds will often associate throughout the year in flocks or in pairs, but they'll form nesting pairs often in the winter time, right before nesting season starts. These birds are socially monogamous, so even though they are in larger flocks, they usually stick with their partner throughout the season. Of course, there will be other birds that try and get in on this, but of course that just depends on the bird for sure. But when it comes to courtship, they have a few different strategies, which is always really interesting. And again, the males are the ones that are implementing most of these strategies in the first place. First off is a butterfly flight. Males will often fly high and slowly kind of flutter and glide back to their perch while singing and announcing their location to the certain females. Another thing that males will do is that they kind of hop close to a potential female and they'll sway side to side, kind of like how you see here. What's going to happen is they'll raise their tail, lower their wing feathers, and just kind of sing as well too. They show off their rump and a lot of their red coloration, or whichever color they are, whether that's that orange or yellow, but it's showing that bright coloration that they have. Occasionally, they'll also display like this with nesting material in their beak. But again, this is showing off those bright feathers they have. And the richer the color is, it shows that a male has better access to resources. And again, if his feathers are in good condition, that means he's very capable of like defending territory or anything like that as well. So that's going to be more of what a female is looking for too. And of course, these birds also partake in some courtship feeding, so the males will often feed the females. It can look a lot like a male feeding the juvenile, just because the juveniles and the adult females look very similar. But it can also look a little bit like kissing as well, too, because they'll just feed each other pieces of food, which is very cute. So when nesting season does come around, nesting starts anywhere from March to July. Of course, they can look for nesting locations a little bit beforehand, and usually they do kind of move around together in search of a good nesting site. Usually the male is protecting the female from any other potential suitors as well too. The female is the one that focuses on building the nest, and occasionally the male will offer her nesting material, but she's not usually interested in using any of the stuff he brings. She kind of focuses on her own materials, and when they're looking for a place to nest, they often find a place with a solid base with an overhang structure. Something that they find very popular are wreaths. And oftentimes, if people hang wreaths on their door during the summer months, you can definitely very easily find a house finch taking residence there. So wreaths are a very popular place, or if you have any overhangs on your porch or anything like that, these birds will definitely take advantage of those locations. When they build their nest, it's often they start on the outer base first with stems, twigs, larger. Oh, I put stems in there twice. Isn't that fun? But essentially, thicker material on the outside, and then they'll use string, wool, feathers, and smaller stems on the inside as well too. Over time, you will find that there is a lot of fecal buildup or poop buildup that'll go on the outside of the nest. Usually what will happen with a lot of nestlings, and this is just with any nestling in general, is that when they poop or when they defecate, they often have it's a solid form of poop called a fecal sac. So it looks a little bit different than what we see on our windshields in the morning. But essentially, this little sac makes it easier for the parents to take away or to honestly sometimes eat, because that keeps the nest clean and it kind of reduces any other activity going on that predators might be able to detect. So for the first few days, the house finches are really good at keeping the nest clean, but once the young are able to kind of push themselves over to the outside of the nest and they just kind of poop on the outside of the nest, essentially, the birds are like, yeah, that's fine. And that you can have that fecal buildup over time, essentially. So that can also be an indicator of what kind of species is nesting in a certain area as well, too. Now, something that is interesting is that it has been shown that house finches have a significant learning process when it comes to nest building. So when in 2005 and 2006 in Montana, there was an outbreak of conjunctivitis, okay? And the conjunctivitis, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later, but essentially it's a disease that took out a lot of the experienced population of house finches. So you had a lot of first-year females that didn't learn anything from any of the older females because there were none around. So what ended up happening was during that first year, when females were trying to build the nest themselves, they often didn't know how to weave the outside material with the inside material lining. And they actually picked like the worst locations to set the nest as well too, often in more open areas or areas that wouldn't naturally make sense to hide from predators. So there is definitely a lot to be learned from the more experienced house finches as well too. Researchers ended up putting fake canary nests in like more suitable places, which the House Finches essentially jumped to that year. It also helped them figure out how to kind of weave in that lining for the next year as well too. But there is that learning period, so there's a difference between what birds know instinctually and what needs to be taught to them as well too, which I find really interesting, and it's just kind of good to see that difference as well. So once the nest is built, these birds can have anywhere from 1 to 6 broods with anywhere from 2 to 6 eggs. So they definitely stay very busy during nesting season. The eggs themselves are really simple in coloration, with a pale blue or white, which occasionally looks a little green depending on the photo, and any speckles that they have can kind of be anywhere on the egg, but it can be just a few on each egg specifically in random spots. When all the eggs are laid, that's when incubation starts. Stays around for 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks, those eggs hatch. They do become altricial young, which means they're blind, naked, and defenseless. They might have a few downy tufts here and there, but they definitely are going to heavily require the parents' care. Both the female and the male do feed them, and nesting in that period of time takes anywhere from 12 to 19 days. So we're looking at a little bit more than 2 weeks depending on how busy things are. So 5 weeks total, we say, before finches are successfully able to fledge the nest as well too. Now, when the young do fledge, the male is actually the one that takes the fledglings and continues to feed them, while the female might start working on another brood as well. So it's not surprising to see the male with a bunch of fledglings following him around and begging for food. The fledglings look very similar to the females. They might have a little bit more of a yellow beak depending on how old they are, and they sometimes usually have 1 or 2 downy tufts that are still trying to get there. There might be a little bit more speckling on the belly, but overall they look very similar to the adult females as well. So when it comes to trying to attract these birds to your feeders, I will say they are probably one of the easiest birds to attract. Oftentimes, you can kind of use any style feeder, whether it's a hopper feeder, a seed tube, a seed cylinder, a tray feeder. They'll take advantage of anything. They're very good at perching, just going in a straight tray, going on the ground. You have the option, they will figure it out, which is really fun. But honestly, you can get them with the simplest of foods, of like with black oil sunflower or safflower as well too. So something like our Supreme blend is really good for just kind of attracting a very good generalized variety of birds as well. And again, these birds are a real joy to have at the feeders. They're usually chaotic in some way, and you never see just one, so it can be a lot of fun. The only thing that we need to keep in mind is that these birds are also susceptible to a range of diseases. So this next picture isn't horrible, but it's like a little gross. Essentially, we're going to be looking at what conjunctivitis or what that pink eye can look like on your birds. So just to give you a heads up there. So, essentially, these birds can suffer from a variety of diseases that can spread from finch to finch, and essentially it's a range of things like conjunctivitis, which is kind of that pink eye that I mentioned, salmonellosis, or possibly avian pox. Some of these can spread from different species, so like finches to cardinals to jays or things like that, while other ones, like the conjunctivitis, is more primary to a lot of the finch species that we have. So it can be found a lot in house finches, and it can occasionally spread to goldfinches or pine siskins or things like that as well, depending on who you have in your area. So when it comes to diseases, if you're not really sure what you're looking for, conjunctivitis is very obvious in basically how it looks. And the symptoms of that, which includes a very swollen eye. Usually the eyelid is very swollen shut, or it just kind of looks like their eyes are like squinted. They're not having a very good time opening their eyes, and oftentimes they can't see. So usually with conjunctivitis, it's dangerous because birds rely on their sight to forage and to hide from predators and to do all these different things. So if they don't have their sight, they're in a lot of trouble. Salmonellosis can often be something with trouble breathing, or they're very lethargic and they're not really moving very well. So if you're able, with lethargic or slow behavior, if you're able to ever grab a bird, that usually means that something's wrong. Fledglings are, of course, the different story because they don't know any better. But if you have an adult bird that just lets you grab it, there's often something else going on. And then avian pox is often essentially kind of like other pox, like chicken pox or anything like that. It's very obvious oh, I can't think of the right word. I would say pustule, but that's not right. But essentially, it's a lot of obvious bumps along the body, whether it's on the beak or the leg or anything like that. It can be very extreme in certain cases. So just to let you know, these are always things to be aware of. Essentially, if you do see any of these behaviors or symptoms or anything like that, and we have that activity at the feeders, we want to remove feeders for at least 2 weeks, all of them, not just the one, but any of the ones that they would frequent are the ones that you want to take down. Keep in mind, feeders are essentially kind of like an airport. You have a lot of people from many different locations all in the same spot, and that can mean a lot of transmission of disease. So it's important to take those down and reduce that transmission as well. So remove those feeders for at least 2 weeks. You can set them up again after those 2 weeks, and if you still see symptoms of those diseases, you want to take them back down until that has steadily disappeared from the area. If you are able to capture any of the sick individuals, you do want to bring them to a rehabber, if at all possible, just because there is no real home treatment for that, and it can be a life or death situation for them too. When it comes to cleaning feeders, because we can't just take the feeders down and then put them back up, we do have to clean them a little bit to make sure none of those diseases spread when you set the feeder back up. It's important to let them soak in soap and water, and then to go ahead and get in there with a really good brush to kind of clean everything up. And then once you kind of rinse that off, it's good to sanitize them as well. We recommend a mix of 1 part bleach to 9 parts water. Some people also use vinegar as well to clean their feeders, but I would still recommend using that as the sanitizer rather than completely ignoring like the soap and water, if that makes sense. We want to make sure that there is nothing in there that could possibly make our finches sick. And again, if you're kind of like, oh, well, I like watching my birds, it would be really hard to have the feeders down for 2 weeks, or it looks like the birds really need the feeders, so we should definitely keep them up. Just remember, with bird feeding, we do it as a hobby to connect ourselves with nature, but it's really important that we also keep nature healthy. So if we see any injuries or things that we can possibly prevent with our setup, then it's important to adjust accordingly. It's better to remove the feeders at least for 2 weeks, and then set them up later so we can enjoy our birds for a very long time, rather than bringing them any injury or harm from something that can easily be avoided, if that kind of makes sense as well too. All right. So with that, that's kind of all I have to say about the house finches. Pretty straightforward, but always really interesting. Once again, Macaulay Library is where I got a lot of the photos and videos, and a lot of that stuff as well. So feel free to check that out for birds that you really enjoy, or birds that you've never heard of as well too, to learn more about them. And then of course, the range map came from Birds of the World as well too, which is a great scientific resource that I use to get a lot of this presentation information together as well too. For those of you that have lasted this long, which once again I appreciate, I have a coupon for you. The coupon code is Finch for $5 off a $25 purchase or more, which saves you $5 off your order, which is always nice. It's only available today. I changed the date. It's not the 15th, it's the 22nd, but it's only available today, the 22nd, for an in-store or a phone order. So feel free to put that in and save a little bit off your next order. And again, if you happen to know anybody in the area that might be interested in learning more about house finches, feel free to let them know. There's a second viewing of this presentation in store at 11 a.m. as well too. Oh, goodness. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for tuning in. And again, thank you for your patience, because I know we had to postpone this presentation. It's very much appreciated. But I hope you guys are continuing to enjoy your birds in the summertime, and I will see you guys the next time. Thank you very much, and I hope you guys have a good day.